Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game, and these are the 10 best weapons in Hearthstone of all time. That's right, I'm going back through all of the expansions, including those in Wild, and I'm taking a look at the weapons which have had the biggest impact on the game, have been the biggest part of the meta in each of their respective eras. So I'm not trying to judge just the raw strength of any given weapon. I'm not comparing the attack versus the durability of these things. I'm comparing the impact they had, how important they've been to the game, how often you would tend to see them in games in their respective eras. So for instance, there might be some Wild format cards right now that don't ever get run, but when they were the new shiny thing, they were incredibly dominant in the game, so they still make this list. And of course, there are going to be some of those classic weapons that have always been around. You're probably going to see those nearer to the top of the list. So all of that said, let's just go ahead and jump into this thing, and I'll show you my 10 best weapons of all time. Starting off at the number 10 spot, it's Hunter's Glaive Zuka. Now, if you've just recently joined Hearthstone, you probably don't even know what this card is, but back in the day when more aggressive face hunter style cards were the thing in the Goblins versus Gnomes era, this was an incredibly powerful card because often Hunter would be able to get out a really cheap early minion and then be able to buff that minion for extra damage, which, you know, one attack doesn't seem like a lot today, but it was still a force to be reckoned with, not to mention, of course, just a 2 attack weapon itself for 2 mana is pretty good with 2 durability. So this just helped Hunters apply even more pressure, and Hunter was very good in this era. Those super fast starts from Hunter were a brutal thing to try to overcome, and this weapon just doubled down on that. So although we don't see it anymore today, I suspect it's probably not even run in Wild format anymore just because there are stronger and better cards. I think it'd be bad to forget just how strong this card was in its respective era. Moving on to my number 9 spot, it's Shaman's Doomhammer. And although this is a classic card and we don't really see it much today, it was still very dominant in one particular era where aggro shaman, some would even call it faith shaman, was a thing, particularly with Tunnel Trog and Totem Golem. If you backed all that early game damage up with Doomhammer, it often just gave the shaman so much pure damage from hand that they just eventually win the game on the back of this card. As other weapons were released, like Spirit Claws, we saw Doomhammer start to lose a little bit of favor as Shaman sort of transformed into the same kind of deck, but with different priorities. This card fell out of favor, but there was still a very long period in the Shaman era, as we'll call it, where Shaman was the deck always, where Doomhammer was a big part of that equation. And it's just such a strong card, too. It's been part of previous Shaman decks before that, and I'm sure someday again it will be part of Shaman decks once more. The nerf to Rockbiter weapon in particular did hurt Doomhammer's chances at success in the future, but there's just so many raw stats here. I'm sure at the end of the day this card will be played again. So it was a big force to be reckoned with. Surely it will be again, and that's why Doomhammer is on this list. Speaking of Spirit Claws, that's actually the number 8 card on my list. Now, the card you see specifically on your screen is not really the Spirit Claws that I think deserves to be on this list. The pre-nerf 1-mana version of Spirit Claws is really the one that was so influential and so dominant in the Karazhan era. A 3/3 weapon for 1 mana, as it turns out, is absolutely absurd, and it made Shaman the best deck in the meta far and away while Spirit Claws was an option, because it turns out it's really not that hard to get spell damage as a Shaman if you're trying to, and it seems like they always rolled the spell damage totem when they needed to with Spirit Claws as well. So this thing just gave them so much early game dominance, because they could either trade into your value minions, killing 3 health things, often 2 or 3 drops, multiple instances with a single weapon, allowing them to sometimes go like 1 for 3 with 1 weapon, which is crazy. But also it was just 9 damage often for a 1 mana play, which is crazy for a deck that's trying to get out onto the board early and kill you. So Spirit Claws pre-nerf was absolutely absurd. It was everywhere on the ladder, and that is why it got nerfed, of course. Since then, clearly the card has fallen off, and I don't think it will really ever be played anymore from here on out. But it made such a strong, powerful impact the moment it hit the scene that I think it still deserves a spot on this list. Anyone who has played Hearthstone lately needs no explanation for the number 7 card on my list. This is Arcanite Reaper, and this is one that's really only earned its spot on this list in the last half a year or so, thanks to Pirate Warrior's arrival in dominance after the mean streets of Gadget Zan. expansion release, Arcanite Reaper was never really played that often because it didn't really fit. You know, aggro warrior wasn't necessarily a thing, and control warriors had better options with Gorehowl. So Arcanite Reaper pretty recently only became a powerful card, but with Pirate Warrior, of course, and the dominance of Pirate Warrior over the last 6 months through the last couple expansions, Arcanite Reaper is everywhere on the ladder because Pirate Warrior is everywhere on the ladder. And this thing becomes just a monstrous tool for destruction. Even if it's just a non-buffed 5/2 Arcanite Reaper, it still does 10 damage for 5 mana, so it's like a 5 mana Pyroblast from time to time. But then when you start buffing it with all the Pirate Synergy cards, you can get a 6/3, a 7/4. I've even seen a 9 attack Arcanite Reaper hit me in the face before. So it becomes such a great tool for those buffs and absorbing those buffs and becoming even more damage for 5 mana, which is just absolutely crazy. So everybody hates to see when that Pirate Warrior plays Arcanite Reaper on turn 5 because you know it's just so much more damage that it's going to be difficult for you to avoid and often secures them a kill. And that is why this card is on the list. Up next at the number 6 spot is Shaman's Jade Claws, yet another Claws card, making the list for Shaman because, yet again, this is the kind of card that works in a variety of Shaman decks, but is particularly good in aggro decks who are looking to contest the board early while still developing a minion, but then even in more mid-range or control-style Shamans that still run the Jade package, suddenly it turns out that a 2-mana weapon, which gives you 2/2 in the first place, that also happens to summon a 6/6, is a pretty good card, and that's what makes Jade Claws so great. It's one of those cards that really dominant in the early game if you can get it out, but also a nice top deck in the late game once you've got those Jades rolling because you can summon such a big thing off of it. And that's why we've seen the Jade package of Jade Claws and Jade Lightning and Aya basically showing up in every kind of Shaman deck. It's in token Shamans today because it works so well. It was in aggro Shamans right at the release of Mean Streets of Gadgetzan. It's been in a variety of different mid-range or control Shamans in the time in between. Because this card is so ultimately flexible and just downright powerful, it can do those kinds of things. And frankly, as long as that core Jade package stays untouched and stays in the game in standard format, I expect Jade Claws will continue to be a pretty big influential card throughout all of the future expansions just because there's so much strong internal synergy in that little set, and it works so well for what Shaman is often trying to do that Jade Claws looks like just a synonymous card with the class at this point. And now for the top 5, starting off with Warriors Gorehowl, not only one of the most recognized and iconic weapons in Warcraft lore, but also just one of those weapons that has stood the test of time in Hearthstone itself, because the Control Warrior archetype has stood the test of time in Hearthstone. This card has always been around. We don't really see it quite as much today, because Taunt Warrior has so many other tools that they don't need Gorehowl, but every other iteration of Control Warrior has often ran Gorehowl at some time or another because, of course, there's just so much damage packed into this card. It's not face damage, but it's minion trading damage, right? If you do the math, it's basically 7 plus 6 plus 5 plus 4 plus 3, etc. I don't know what that raw number is right now, but it's a ton of clearing potential available in this single card. So that's what made it such a great tool for a control warrior who wants to control their opponent's minions. It's also been used, though, sometimes for that last punch of face damage right alongside that Gorehowl for the lethal kill and that burst damage that you need to just finish off game. So it really does just work well. It's one of the best weapons in the game if you think about it from a stat or output standpoint, but it's also just a weapon that fits its class and the archetype that its class wants to run historically in the game as well. So Gorehowl is everything you want in a warrior weapon. Speaking of warrior weapons, I actually have another one at the number 4 spot, and I'm sure most of you have guessed at this point, another one at the number 1 spot as well. But up first, let's talk about Death's Bite, the Naxxramas weapon, which is yet another weapon that does everything warrior wants to do, because, of course, this one is not only a 4-mana 4/2, putting it in line with things like True Silver Champion, but the Deathrattle here actually works really well for warrior because whirlwind effects, of course, synergize with so many different cards in the class and buffing cards via enrage. It also, of course, kills token minions on your opponent's side of the board, which can be really nice. And I think this card was most famously used with Grim Patrons in the Patron era of Warrior, where it was just another whirlwind tool to help you unlock all of those patrons and go absolutely crazy on the board. And that means that this card was so flexible. It works in more aggressive decks just because it packs a lot of damage. It works in combo decks, setting up those enrage or damage effects on things like Ravaging Ghoul or Grim Patrons. And it works in control decks because it just enables you to kill 2 middle-sized minions, but also enables you to kill boards of tokens. So it's one of those cards that's just, again, ultimately flexible and accomplishes everything that Warrior wants to accomplish, making it a perfect fit for the class. And this thing would undoubtedly still be run in Warrior today if you could. It's just a second really good mid-range weapon on top of something like Fiery War Axe. So just the perfect card for Warrior. Absolutely fantastic weapon all around. And now moving into the top 3, we basically have, from this point forward, the iconic weapons of each given class that are in these spots. This is just one of those cards that is absolutely everywhere. It's a hunter card. If you have a hunter deck, there's a pretty good chance Eaglehorn Bow is going to fit into that deck. You know this card is good because it's even run in hunter decks that don't run secrets, which means at the end of the day, a 3-mana 3/2 just gives you so much onboard value or so much potential damage that this is still a good weapon regardless of its effect. But of course, throughout the history of Hearthstone, in various different metas, hunters have also ran at least a couple secrets. You'd often see just like 2 or 3 secrets added in because they're good cards and because they helped buff Eaglehorn Bow. And when it was able to get multiple charges, obviously the value just starts to skyrocket. So really, in almost every hunter deck since Hearthstone's creation, Eaglehorn Bow has found a spot or been very close to finding a spot, and it's just been one of the hunter cards you expect to see and expect to play around. And some people may not remember that this card has actually been nerfed. It used to say whenever a secret is revealed, so even if your opponents had a secret that was activated, you'd still get Eaglehorn Bow buffed, which made it even more absurd way back in the day, pre-nerf to Eaglehorn Bow. So the potential for it then was even stronger than it is now, and it still remains such a good card that hunters often run that it has to have a spot on this list as the go-to hunter weapon. So moving into my second best weapon of all time, it's actually the Paladin's True Silver Champion. Just another one of those iconic, classic, or even basic set cards in this instance that all Paladin decks always have found some way to run. It's just good. It's a 4-mana 4/2, much like Deathspite before it on the list, which is just really good stats. It lines up so well against so many different things. 4 health, kills a lot of different minions. 2 durability is great because you get to use it multiple times. Of course, in this instance, the +4 health total you get is also nice because you have to stay alive. It helps you mitigate some of that damage you take while you're trading, or just sometimes give you that extra heal to stay alive in certain instances. But the real advantage here is much like the other cards I've mentioned, it just fits in every kind of deck. It fits in aggro paladins who are just looking to do 8 damage for 4 mana. It fits in mid-range paladins who just need to contest the board and have some sort of answer for those mid-game minions and help them swing and catch up as far as tempo is concerned. And it fits in control paladins because it's just removal for minions, but also some heal on your face as well, which is important when you're trying to play into the late game. So just the perfect, ultimate, flexible card that fits its class exactly as it should, much like the last few cards on this list, and in fact the next card on this list as well. You can't go wrong with True Silver Champion if you're a Paladin. It is undoubtedly one of the best weapons in the game. But it's not number 1. There should have been very little doubt in your mind what the number 1 card on this list was going to be. It is the Hearthstone weapon. It needs no explanation. It needs no defense. Everybody and their brother and their mother know that Fiery War Axe is the best weapon in the history of Hearthstone. It's the best weapon today in Hearthstone. At any given point, if you go back throughout the game, it is still the best weapon in Hearthstone. There is a reason it is nicknamed the Fiery Win Axe, because often if you get it in the early game, it just gives you so much early tempo and helps you resolve the things that your opponent are trying to do that it's going to win you the game. It fits in hyper-aggressive decks like Pirate Warrior because of how much damage it packs. It fits in control decks for Warrior because it just gives you those early game answers to swarms of minions from your opponent. It is the ultimate tool. It packs the most punch per mana cost for any other weapon in the game. It is the weapon of Hearthstone. It's Fiery Win Axe, number 1. And there you have it. That's my list. My 10 best weapons of all time. Now, I'm sure some people out there, as always, will disagree with certain things on this list. I like that. Let's hear about it. Let's hear your take on these cards. What cards belonged on the list that I missed? How should the order be shuffled around? I want to hear your take. What cards do you think have had the biggest impact on the game? Which cards have been the most influential in the world of weapons? All of that would be great for me to hear. So leave a comment below. I'd love to read your thoughts. But until then, thank you so much for watching. And until next time, game on.